Man to Men is for men like me. Hi, my name is Tyler Johnson. I'm from Logansport, Indiana, and I'm a senior at Purdue University studying mechanical engineering technology. I hope you enjoy this episode.
This is Man to Men, the premier audio journal for men who live faithfully and lead courageously. I'm Jared Musgrove with you guys again for another in-depth conversation with a courageous leader. And today, it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Russell Moore. He is the editor-in-chief of Christianity Today and the author of Losing Our Religion, an altar call for Evangelical America. We're going to be discussing some of that book today. But you also should know he hosts the weekly podcast, The Russell Moore Show, and is the co-host of Christianity Today's weekly news and analysis podcast, The Bulletin. That's among many other things that Dr. Moore is involved in. We may get into some of that today. Dr. Moore, welcome to Man to Men.
Oh, thanks for having me. Good to be with you.
Well, it's always a pleasure getting to sit, hear from you, whether that's reading, it's on your show, it's in person. One thing that I have noticed and that I wanted to open up with today is that you've spent the better part of the past 2 decades in public religious life, really with a front row seat to, shall we just say, a lot of goings on?
Yeah.
And one of the aspects I really appreciated in your new book, Losing Our Religion, was the lack of the so-called exvangelical tone that's really become the flavor du jour of a lot of these things. I wanted to ask you, what has kept you hopeful in the middle of just a lot of upheaval over the way that we've thought about Christianity and even just being an evangelical?
Well, I'm not an exvangelical at all, and not even close to being an exvangelical. And I think some of that has to do with what I talked about in the book of going through as a 15-year-old. In some ways was kind of a vaccination, because if you think about what parenting is supposed to be, is allowing kids to have manageable crises, to learn how to navigate them so they can navigate bigger crises. I had that as a 15-year-old where I went through a kind of a crisis of faith. Is this all real? Mm-hmm. Is it really about something else? And so working through that, then I kind of had the tools to understand how to differentiate between Jesus and what goes on in Jesus's name. If that hadn't been the case, I'm not sure that my faith would have held through some of the things that we've seen over the past few years. But we did have that. And when it comes to hope, James Davison Hunter, the political scientist, in his book, new book on democracy and solidarity, at the very end, he talks about the difference between optimism and hope. And he says optimism is just a kind of cheerful fatalism, which is to say, well, everything will all work out. Hope is very different. And I resonate with that because it's what I've been trying to say for some time. When people will say to me, well, where's the hope? Often what they really mean is, where's the reassurance? Everything will be fine. Right. But if you think about the way the scripture defines hope that is seen is not hope. And instead, the way that we get to hope is Romans chapter 5. Suffering leads to endurance. Endurance leads to character. Character leads to hope. And hope does not put to shame. Or Romans 8, the hope that is there actually does lead to groaning at the wreckage that is around. And so I think that what hope actually is to say, we don't know what's going on or how to fix this, but we know who you are, speaking to Jesus. And so that's kind of the mode that I'm in right now. And with people that I'm talking to, I find that I almost have to diagnose what kind of cynicism they're in danger of falling into. Yeah. So for some people, it's a cynicism of saying, because of what I have seen, that means that 2,000 years of the Holy Spirit working in Christianity must all be wrong. And I can't trust anything. For some people, it's, well, this is the way the game's played. Let's play it. And so you almost have to know, in the same way you do when you're talking to somebody, when you're evangelizing somebody, you have to know kind of, is this somebody who thinks that he or she's too bad for the gospel, or is this somebody who thinks he or she's too good for the gospel? And you have to reinforce the other end of that, or you further the problem.
Yeah. Now, you discuss also in the book something that I wanted to ask you about, because it's an idea I've seen in other places. You discuss in the book, and I think in some other of your works, this idea of exilic identity, just leaning into kind of what you were talking about, which is just sharing with different people, thinking about where we are in our faith journey, where we are in others' faith journey. Why is the idea of exilic identity or exilic discipleship so essential to Christians throughout history? And how might or must we reclaim it today?
Well, if you think about what the book of Hebrews talks about, for instance, in Hebrews 11 and 12, Hebrews 11 talking about our ancestors in the faith, if they had wanted to return to the city from which they came, they could have done that. But instead, they saw something else from afar, and they were pilgrims and strangers in the earth. So that's the normal pattern of the Christian life. And then you come into Hebrews 12, and the book talks about the things that are shaken and the things that cannot be shaken. And so I think part of the problem that we have is we want stability, and we want stability now. And we want to have a sense of home that is tangible, that we can see with our eyes, and that we can walk, a road we can walk by sight. And so it's almost like there was a really fascinating book a couple of years ago. I think it was called Wayfinding. Somebody not a believer at all, just talking about how part of the essential nature of being a human being is that, unlike, say, birds or other animals who navigate by instinct, that human beings have to have this sense of finding a way, and that's necessary to be lost to some degree, and reading signposts and learning how to go. Well, that's certainly true when it comes to following Christ. And so there's a following the pillar of fire in Exodus. What we want is a roadmap. What we don't want is to just the next bit of light for the next step on the walk. But that's essential. And so what happens is sometimes people, because we want home so much, when those things are shaken, and they always are, then we feel like we've lost everything. And then there's a kind of homelessness that's really traumatic, as opposed to the kind of preemptive homelessness that says, I'm not ultimately going to find stability here. I'm reaching out to it in Christ behind the veil. Those are the people who are actually able to flourish and to thrive.
That's good. Is that what you would define as an exile these days? Yeah,
because if you think about the way that exile works scripturally, exile is not. I mean, you could come to Jeremiah and Lamentations and other Ezekiel and have a sense of, can you believe what they did to us? They took our home away. They took our temple away. And what those books say is, no, God did this. God is behind this. And what that means is God is doing something. And so don't waste the exile. Don't fail to see God's mercy in the wilderness. And what that does is, right now, so much of the power that people and institutions and life has over us is the threat of exile. So if you, and that, almost everybody's in that situation, whether it's, somebody who's in a Church of Satan cult, or somebody who's, doing the IT at the business. The ultimate threat is if you step out of line, you're not one of us anymore. And so we don't want that. I mean, it's part of human nature to see that as danger and to see that as horrifying. Well, as Christians, though, it's equivalent to what we do with being crucified with Christ. If I'm crucified with Christ, if I've already been judged under the law, and I've already been to hell, then I can say to the accuser, you don't have anything else to do. You can't re-execute a dead man. With exile, you can't re-exile an exile. We are already at home in the sense of homelessness, because we've sorted through the priorities. So David Foster Wallace did this amazing commencement speech several years ago, and that's a really rare thing to say because there are not many amazing commencement speeches. But he talked about that if you worship power, then you're going to be constantly scared. And if you worship renown, you're going to constantly feel belittled because it gives you a kind of power over you. And if you worship a sense of fitting in or stability, then you're going to be really, really thrown when those things are shaken, and they will be.
Yeah, I do believe we're all experiencing that. And I wanted to lean into some of your experience today, because you have served in many roles in religious life and Christian life. One of those is that you have been an ordained minister and pastor. You have been a seminary professor. And we have men listening from collegiate age up to retirees. And so I want to plug into a little bit more of Russell Moore, the pastor, the seminary professor. As you see so much of this challenge from the so-called exvangelicals to even just challenges to the Christian faith today, what would you say to the men who are listening? What are the essentials of the Christian faith? What are the core truths that unite us in your view and in your pastoral ministry?
Well, I think the core of it is what Jesus says when he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So it's not a set of abstractions. Those kind of come later.
Yes.
It is the person of Jesus Christ. So truth is a who. The way is a who. Life is a who. And so it's a clinging to and a following after him. And that means that we recognize that he's told us what he's told us we can trust, even if we can't see it and verify it. I trust you. And that means that those sort of central markers of the historic Christian faith, what C.S. Lewis would call mere Christianity, are reliable. This is 2,000 years of reflection, really based on conversations around a fire and from a mountain and elsewhere of Jesus, who is saying the revelations that have come so far are reliable, and the revelations I'm going to guide you into will be reliable. And I think that a lot of what happens is that when there's a lack of confidence in that, then what we end up doing is we end up trying to find confidence in something else. So for some people, it is, well, let's find confidence by all of these detailed theological abstractions. And if we just have that, then we have it. Or let's try to find all of these rules and regulations or cultural sorts of mores and those types of things. If we have that, we have it. Or let's just look at all the pragmatic ways that this works. And as long as it works, we have it. And that's just not what Christianity is.
Right. That's been challenged for many of us. And I know that's been challenged. You shared here and also in your writing that was a challenge early on. And then I know just in the last few years, you experienced a very public leaving from your denomination of faith. So to the men listening, how would you pastor and walk us through what we should consider when faced with potentially leaving a ministry or a church or even a denomination? What are core questions we should be asking? How should we come to those decisions?
Well, I mean, I say often I've been a stayer and a leaver, and a stayer much longer than a leaver. I've left one time, but I stayed for all of my life before that. And in many ways, haven't really left. I mean, there's a statue of Lottie Moon, who is the
right.
great Southern Baptist missionary figure right over here, and a Baptist hymnal right behind me. So I'm still a Baptist.
Right, there's a heritage there for you.
Yeah, and I'm still a Southern Baptist with a lowercase s. Still. So I think when it comes to the decision of trying to think through, should I stay in a dysfunctional kind of situation, or should I leave it? I mean, you think about the book several years ago, Exit, Voice, or Loyalty, about when confronted with something that's wrong, there's the option to exit, just to leave it. There's the option to exercise voice and to try to change it. And so I think the first thing that somebody has to do in trying to figure out what do I do is to know yourself enough to know, okay, where have my blind spots typically been? And so if you're the kind of person who is in other experiences of your life, you're more likely to be, I'm done and I'm out of here, then really check yourself and go very, very slow when it comes to leaving. If you're the kind of person, though, who tends to narrate nostalgically for yourself and try to find ways not to see the negative, and that's more my disposition, then you really need to check that. Yeah, you need to check that, and you need to say where are the blind spots that are there. So in my case, I was in not only a denomination that I loved and that had shaped and formed me all of my life, I was also in a situation where I was in the ministry position that I loved. Our particular ministry, fantastic. My team was fantastic. Our board was fantastic. Our work was fantastic. All of that. So it took me a long time to sort of sort this through. And I talked to a lot of people to help me to I didn't trust myself. And so I would say, help me to figure out whether staying is going to be wrong or leaving would be wrong. And I could see the wrongness of both, because I could say, if I leave, I'm not going to be able to help them. This is a great institution with a lot of great people, and we should do it. On the other hand, staying, I was realizing we had a lot of people who were, for instance, coming into the SBC. I had a conversation not long before I left with several African American pastors, for instance, who had come into the SBC because they identified with us and thought, well, this is what the Southern Baptist Convention is. and they're ending up getting really, really hurt. And so I'm having to say, am I, I've got an entire lifetime of having been in every room and knowing all the shibboleths and everything, and other people don't. So I had to weigh all of that. So I would find people who knew me, who knew similar situations, but who didn't have a stake in it. And so those were the people, none of them Southern Baptists, I would talk to and say, what do you think? And Tim Keller, late pastor from New York, friend of mine, he kind of had the decisive word in this, because I said, I'm trying not to make a decision that I'm going to regret. And he said, do you really think of all of the possible things that somebody might say if you leave, that there is going to be one human being on the face of the earth who would say, why so soon? And, we stopped and sort of laughed at that.
I can hear him saying it, yeah.
Yeah. He said, you've already decided what to do. Your mind hasn't gotten there yet, but you actually do know what to do. And in my case, that was the right thing. Now, the problem is, some people have a tendency where their kind of vulnerability is toward a bitterness and an anger. I've got kind of the opposite, where I kind of retroactively, nostalgically remove all the bad part, and remember the good parts and
the ideal
long to go back. Yeah. And whenever I get into that sort of situation, something will happen that will remind me, oh yeah, that's why. So I think you really have to have the kind of self-knowledge and the kind of community around you to help you to know whether to stay or whether to leave.
Right.
And then once you do that, have an understanding of people who make the other decision. Because, it's really easy to say, anybody who is still in a dysfunctional institution that you have left, to say, can you believe these sellouts?
Yeah.
Whatever. Well, I mean, you were there until you weren't.
How quickly we forget.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, and not to mention the fact that in some situations, it is better for certain people to stay and for certain people to go. So don't judge other people's motives.
Yeah, no, those are wise words. So thank you for walking us through your own story there and being open about that, and then just giving each of us as men ways to consider. I love what you mentioned about community, and I know that even just seeking community from those who may be outside the situation. So much wisdom there, and you write. I think it's the final chapter of your book, where it's near the end, embracing new communities and friendships. That is something you're writing about. What are some of those for you in this season, and how might faithful Christians consider with whom we can and will work in kind of this new era that we're moving into?
Well, I think one of the things that has happened over the past several years is what I think I might have mentioned this in the book. It's hard to remember because
I understand.
That book was 4 times the size that it is, and I cut out 3/4 of it, so I don't remember sometimes what's there and what's out. But,
right.
David Frum, who writes for The Atlantic, talks about the fact that we're in an era of revealed preference, where you have people who thought they were doing the same thing. And the way he puts it is to say, you have people who are doing the same thing, but they're doing it for different reasons. And that didn't matter, for a long time until it does. And now you have people who are realizing, wait, the motives and the reasons actually matter more than the activity because of where everything is leading, and that causes a lot of disorientation. And so, one of the examples, for instance, that I mentioned in the book is, and this happens in so many different ways. So you think about just in the evangelical community, some of the kind of two-party binaries that we have created. So think of, for instance, Calvinist Arminian. When you had the resurgence of Reformed theology, which I was a part of. You had some of us who were drawn to at least certain aspects of that because it was a way of broadening out into the wider kingdom of God. So it was a way to kind of swim out of sectarianism and toward the great tradition. You had some people, though, who were embracing that to go in the other direction, wanting to narrow into a different sect. Well, that isn't really seen until later on. And you start to realize, actually, I remember the moment when I was working with a friend who's an Arminian theologian and a straight down the line Arminian. And I realized he and I actually have a lot more in common when it comes to what we would say to someone who is wondering, does Jesus love me? Should I walk away from that? We would have the same counsel,
right? Even
though we're coming at it from different directions, than I would from somebody who said, let's narrow down into our tribes. Or the conversations about, say, women in ministry that for a long time became complementarianism. You're not for women in ministry. You do think there's some distinctive roles. Or egalitarianism. You think that all of the ministry positions and family relationships are open to people of both genders. That kind of two-party thing, you ultimately kind of realize, wait, I actually, even though I do believe that there are distinctions in some of the callings, I have more in common with the woman who says, look, I feel called to the pastorate, and here's how I interpret 1 Timothy 2. And I don't think that it excludes me from ministry. She and I might disagree about that, and we might kind of walk the. I have much more in common with her than I have with, say, a Doug Wilson, who is rooted in a kind of abject misogyny. And she has more in common with me than she has with the person who may say, well, yes, I think that 1 Timothy 2 does not restrict you from ordination because first, who cares what Paul thinks? We have a lot more in common with each other. And so I think what's happening is that we're starting to see that, we're starting to realize that, and we're starting to be put in situations where some of the people that we attributed maturity to because of where they parroted abstractions, it's not there. And some of the people that we attributed immaturity to because they didn't parrot those abstractions have shown great maturity and depth. And I've certainly found that. I've mentioned this before. I think I mentioned it in the book. There was a time when I would get up and critique Beth Moore all the time. And then when it really came down to it, and some of the people that I considered to be in my own tribe were sort of thinking through politically. Well, I won't attribute to what they're doing,
sure.
But she was the one who not only was in touch with me and working me through this, but I realized very early, wait, she's a really deep theologian and knows Jesus really well. I think we're in that situation, and I think that's what in Scripture is what often happens, is that you have these seemingly stable communities that are shaken, but then new communities emerge. And I think you have to be open to that and to realize that, you're often going to be finding yourself in a situation where, if you're Simon Peter in Galatia, who is this, this guy that is coming out of, persecuting us land, and now he's going to come in and tell me where I can sit.
Right. Yeah.
Well, you know how that actually is, and that happens to all of us.
Yeah. Nothing new there, I guess. Yeah.
No.
One thing I enjoy is that, and I've noticed about you, is that you make a continued point to talk with people across generations. I mean, many millennials, although we're not really the young ones. I speak as a geriatric millennial, but also just Gen Z and Gen Alpha. What are the trends you're seeing in these conversations with the coming generations so far as the faith and I guess the state of Christianity today? What are you seeing? What are you hearing?
The thing that's remarkable to me is there is a resurgent sincerity is the only word that comes to mind. And what I mean by that is when 15 years ago, if I'm on a college campus and I'm kind of throwing open the floor to a group of students and saying, what do you want to ask me about? They're typically going to be things along the lines of, how does predestination work with free will? Or, how do I argue my position on homosexuality? Or, those sorts of things. Now, those things may come up later, but usually the first things that are going to come up are going to be the things along the lines of, how do I pray? And what they mean by that is, take me sort of step by step through, not just here's how to motivate me to pray. How do I actually do it? What do you do when you pray? How do I read Scripture when my attention span is not as good as I want it to be?
That's one for a lot of generations right there. Yeah.
A lot of people. Yeah. But the thing that's remarkable to me is not that they have those questions. It's that they will ask those questions, and they will ask those questions in front of everybody without this sense of, posing. I don't want to, and I think there's some genuine sincerity, there. That I find really encouraging.
I agree. I love that it seems that this generation is reclaiming some of that. Yeah.
And I think part of the problem is that a lot of times what people do, if they don't actually stay connected to people across the generations, then the way that they categorize them is by who's making TikTok videos, or who's posting what where, and those are typically the aberrations in any generation. And instead, you have to ask what's really and actually going on.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, saying that, we have great challenges, and one of the great challenges is that 15 years ago, if somebody said to me, I'm not sure that I'm going to stay a Christian, it was almost always either theological, I can't believe this, what seems like nonsense to me, or it was moral. Church is too strict with whatever, usually having to do with sex. Now, that's very rarely the case, mostly because those kinds of issues are filtered out sooner. But the people who are having a genuine crisis are the people who are saying, is this real?
Mm-hmm.
Is this really just politics, or is this really just marketing, or something else? Well, that's a different sort of issue to face, and what it requires is not just here's a list of things to say, or it requires something more than that. It requires actual embodiment,
yes,
of being the people of Christ.
Yeah, and that authenticity and sincerity you mentioned. Yeah,
yeah.
And you talk a little bit about TikTok, different forms of media. You yourself are the EIC of a major national magazine. What has that been like in this era where we see more print publications, either doing away with maybe the physical aspect altogether? What are challenges you're seeing there as far as Christian media?
Well, we're in a variety of different media platforms, and what we find is that you're reaching sometimes completely different people, and you're also finding completely different on-ramps for people.
Yeah.
So what we do, for instance, and what I'm trying to do, is to have much greater collaboration between all of those different expressions, because they're doing different things.
So true.
So with, we are ready right in the moment to talk about things that are happening in the world. Most people interact with that either via social media or internet online. Print magazine, which this month is our first of the new print magazine. The print magazine is to do something different. It is to think not in terms of days, but to think in terms of a much longer period of time, and to say this is deep reflection.
Yeah, a more long form
on
journalism.
This.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We're gonna deeply reflect on these sorts of things. So it's multiple different kinds of ways of engaging people. And then usually what happens is people who maybe they come in through podcasting ultimately then end up in deeper reflection in print or online, and vice versa.
So truly multimedia, perhaps unlike we've ever seen it.
Yeah, and that's going to change even more as we move forward, because the technological upheavals that are happening. It's one of the things that's been very difficult for me to do is in preparing Christians for a time like this. You have to. It seems like there's not much of a gap between, that's crazy, that'll never happen, and, well, it's everywhere. What are you going to do? So true. It just is it's almost immediately. And so when you look at things like AI and the changing kinds of technological platforms, it's very difficult to prepare people to be in those spaces, but they're going to have to be. So you look at, for instance, what's happened with the smartphone. I mean, this happened so relatively quickly that there was just no way for people to say, okay, let's start thinking through now what it means to maintain attention, what it means to deal with having a sense of judgment from other people. How do we deal with body image with our adolescents? How do we? It's very difficult to do that until you're in a situation where, well, we're in a smartphone world. What are you going to do? So that's and that's going to continue to accelerate.
Man to Men listeners are involved in and leading impactful organizations across the country. So I wanted to ask you guys, is your church, ministry, or nonprofit seeking more laborers for a plentiful harvest? Imagine the transformative impact of integrating passionate young leaders into your mission. Friend of the show and our sponsor, Reliant Mission, can assist you in creating your own financially support-based residencies, all tailored to your needs. Reliant provides world-class training and coaching for these young leaders to successfully raise their support. They also manage all the employment logistics, freeing your organization to focus on the ministry work that God has called you and your new residents to. If you're looking to expand your team and your impact by equipping and empowering young leaders, visit reliant.org/partner, that is RELIANT.org/partner, to learn how they can support your efforts. We have listeners from across the country here at Man to Men, but I don't assume that every man has heard about or experienced camp ministry. Friend of the show and sponsor Lifeway offers 3 national camps, Fuge, Student Life, and CentriKid, and they are always on the search for strong, capable young men to work camp each summer. Now, these are job opportunities, guys, and they range from leading Bible study and recreation each day to being on production staff. These are the guys who are responsible for running sound, lights, and video for a seamless and smooth worship experience. And since Lifeway camps serve over 100,000 campers every summer, it won't be hard for you to find the job that's just right for you. You can go to the websites linked in the show notes to learn more. I hope that you'll go and apply today. Well, I'd love to move, Dr. Moore, into a part of our show that I call Everywhere Every Day. And basically, this is just a few minutes as we close with each guest for a more personal conversation about just how you live and move and be. Some of it born out of my own curiosity and into, like, what do people do all day? So let's start at the first of your day, if you don't mind. What time do you usually get up in the morning, and what are the things that you've just got to do to get your day started?
I usually get up around 6. And I hate to say that I'm extremely dependent on caffeine.
I was going to ask about coffee. Yeah.
Very dependent on caffeine. And so we actually have, the coffee pot is in my room.
Oh,
so it's not even like going to the kitchen. I've got to have coffee to get there. So yeah. So it's around that.
Is it time to go off each morning, or is it a Michael Scott situation where you have to get up and start it and then go back to bed?
It is very close to a Michael Scott bacon on the George Foreman grill. I hate to say it's very close to that.
Oh my goodness. Well, I won't say have to. You probably do have to. Professionally, but you get to read a lot. You have for most of your life, as I've been able to pick up. But what is fun reading for you? You don't have to read for work. You don't have to prepare a project. I just get to read and have fun. What is fun reading for you?
Almost all of my reading, I only do fun reading.
Oh, love it. Yeah.
I mean, because here's the thing. I can think of some situations where I would say, okay, I have to read this because I have to be, but those are very rare. I mean, usually I read what I'm interested in, and that's kind of where what comes out in terms of ministry comes out of. So I read the stuff that is interesting to me. And I don't think, I think for some people, it's kind of like, I think there are some people who assume, okay, well, you're really buckling down and you're reading all of this stuff, and then, I get to go on vacation. I'm not going to read a thing. Mm-hmm. That would be miserable to me. I would be really, really bored in that situation. It's more, honestly, it's more the case that watching movies or television is what I have to do for work. Mm-hmm. And so, like, for instance, I was just with a group of friends the other day, they're talking about Breaking Bad, which was what, 2008?
Yeah, that's not a new show.
I haven't seen Breaking Bad in my life. And I was thinking, I probably need to buckle down someday and watch Breaking Bad. During the opening months of COVID quarantine, my wife and kids and I every night watched Lost.
Oh, just catching up.
First time.
Yeah.
First time. Because when that came out, whenever that was, it was like a frenetic sort of time of life. Everything slowed down. We're like, okay, well, now we can watch.
Oh, man.
We can watch Lost. So maybe I'll see Breaking Bad sometime in the 30s.
Man, I resonate so much with that answer. I also love Dr. Moore, and I've noticed it for years. You really are a man who Spurgeon said, when you cut him, he bleeds Bible. Most every example that comes out of you has some biblical correlation or insight. What are favorite books or places of scripture for you that you find yourself going back to over and over, most personally?
Well, I love all of the Gospels, but I think if you just took a copy of the Bible on my bedside and flipped it open and said, okay, let's look and see where most of the highlights are going to be, John is going to probably lead. I love the Gospel of John. I love the book of Hebrews. I love 1st and 2nd Samuel.
Amen.
Exodus. I mean, it's hard to kind of narrow it down. But those are, I found myself, I was teaching through Genesis, Exodus, over the past year, and I realized, I'm actually also teaching Gospel of John. Mm-hmm. Now, some of that has to do with the fact that John is just so anchored in all of these themes, Genesis and Exodus. But yeah.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Those are things that I love.
You're a prolific writer. What is some of the most fun you've had writing recently?
I really like writing a weekly newsletter, which I started doing in COVID, just as a kind of maintaining connection with folks. But I really like doing that because it forces me. My typical practice is to say, I'm going to wait until I'm really inspired and motivated, and then I'm going to write something. But that's not the way that writing works.
No, it's not.
And so I've kind of subverted myself by saying, in the same way that I do with teaching or preaching, if I wait to say, okay, what do I think about Genesis 12? That's one thing. But if I'm teaching Genesis 12 on Sunday, then I'm going to find out what I think about Genesis 12. Meantime. And so with the newsletter, I force myself, because if it's not out there on Thursday, people are going to ask me, where is it? So I sit down, and sometimes people don't believe this when you say it, but it's genuinely true. I do not know what I think about something until I write it. So when I sit down every week to write the newsletter, I have absolutely no idea what I'm going to say or where I'm going to land. I just start writing it, and you find that there are all these things kind of subconsciously that then you work through as you're doing it. And I love that.
That's a great skill. Write yourself to clarity. I love that.
Yeah.
It's
one time I was, I sometimes sleepwalk, and I can sleep talk in ways that seem very coherent, and I'm completely asleep. I wrote an article one time, asleep.
Was it any good?
In the night. Well, the next day, one of my staff members said, we haven't put the article up yet. And I said, what article? The article that you sent at 2:00 this morning. I went back and found it, and I read it and said, well, I actually agree with it.
That's good. Conscious meets subconscious. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, so when you are conscious, you are having to meet a lot of people. And just in your very public roles over the years, you've met thousands of people. Here's the life skill a lot of us struggle with as men. Sometimes we forget people's names.
Oh,
What do you do in a conversation if you've forgotten someone's name?
Well, that happens all the time. And I can tell you what I have learned not to do. Early on, and this would have been a long time ago, I was working for a U.S. congressman. And so I was really young and sort of in the Washington world. And someone advised me. So when you've forgotten someone's name, what you do is to say, how did you spell your first name again? Very first time I tried to do that, it was B-O-B.
I was thinking Bob in my head. Yeah.
Yeah. And so like, okay, well, I'm not going to do that again. And so now what I usually do is I don't use the name and I try to look for some clue as to that. And then later I'll ask somebody, hey, what was his name again?
Yeah. No way around it.
No way around it. And the other thing is, what's really difficult is because I meet so many people, I don't ever know, or a lot of times I don't know, have I met this person before or am I meeting this person for the first time? And so when you say, oh, it's good to meet you,
mm-hmm.
and then the person says, well, actually, we were on a committee together or whatever, you don't want to do that. So I always say it's good.
Yes, good to see you,
because that's true. Yeah. Whether it's for the first time or
I've leaned on it's good to see you for quite a few years already. That's great. You have also experienced a lot of friendships over the years in running a busy schedule, and you have a full family life. We haven't talked about that much here, but you have a wife. You have four or five sons.
Five sons. Mm-hmm.
So, how have you forged and maintained close friendships over the years?
Well, I mean, two of the things that have proven to be absolutely necessary for me. In addition, I have certain friendships that are, I have one friend that I was just talking to right before we came on here, who's been a friend for literally 30 something years.
What a gift.
And this is the guy who can say anything to me and does. I mean, he will just, my wife will often say, I just cannot imagine if we, talking about his
mm-hmm.
wife and her, if we talk to each other the way the two of you talk to each other,
Right.
But he has complete ability to do that, and I love it. And then I have a group of friends that we get together. We all live kind of a similar kind of life. Mm-hmm. Most of them are singer-songwriters. I have no talent at all, but we both have the kind of, you're on the road, you're off the road, you're
artist hours. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we will get together for it's called a pipe night, mm-hmm. because most of them smoke pipes. I don't. But we call it pipe night. My 12-year-old son, because I would say to my wife often, okay, I'm going over to Andrews for pipe night. He heard that for like a year as fight night and said to her one day, do they literally like punch each other? So we have that, and that is really, and then the other is I have a group of friends that, two groups of friends that we get together, two different groups of friends that get together once a week by Zoom. And one of those is a book club. It's not really a book club.
Are any of them really a book club?
Read the book and talk about the book, but it's an excuse for us to get together. And I find that a lot of times on a Wednesday night, I'll think, I've got too much going on. I can't. And I almost don't do it. And then once I'm there, about 10 minutes in, I think, oh man, am I glad I did this. It's just, is just necessary.
Yeah.
And then on Thursdays, I get together with a group of very different from each other people, ranging from atheists all the way to, Keller was part of it before he died. And so some of us are Christians, some are atheists, some are, on completely opposite ends of everything. And that has become very similar to, say, a Sunday school class in the sense that the atheists are very vulnerable now to say, tell us what it's like to believe. And the rest of us are really able to, hey, what's going on with you? So there's somebody is sick, then it's kind of, okay, for those of you who pray about this. For those of you who don't, whatever you do, but let's care for this person. And so that's really sweet.
That is
part
sweet.
Of life.
That is sweet. What a gift! It just in all those facets. I love that. Reason I asked the question is just I know a lot of men that I talk with, again, from 20-year-olds to men who just retired. Friendship is a major aspect or loss in their life.
Well, it's very difficult. And one of the reasons it's difficult, and that's why I think that one of the ways that we've been able to do it is by having an excuse.
Yes.
To get together. Because I think one of the things that a lot of churches do is to say, let's get together and commune.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got, let's have this small group that gets together. And that typically filters in the people who like to get together and commune, which is not me. It's not a lot of men.
No.
But if you have a reason why, okay, we're getting together to do this, for those of us who are more kind of nerdy types, we're going to get together and talk about this book. Or for other people, we're going to get together and do disaster relief.
Yeah, side by side aspect. Yeah,
that's
so important.
The Lewis side by side thing. It actually does then ultimately lead to very, very deep connection, but you get at it a little more sideways.
So true. So true. Is there an area of creativity or contribution that you'd like to work on, but you just haven't gotten to it yet?
Well, I want to write a novel.
Fiction.
And and I wrote toward a novel, but I'm not going to publish it because it was coming out of a lot of sort of working through personal experience. And so it would seem like kind of a tell-all, sort of a thing that I'm not,
a thinly veiled fable
or something like so I'm not going to do that, but I would like to write it.
Oh, that's wonderful. I think you certainly have the skills and the imagination for that, for certain. I'll look forward to it one day.
Well, I'm hoping sometime within the next year or so, and I think it might be surprising to people, sort of the genre it is.
Okay. All right. You heard it here first, guys. Dr. Moore, where can our men best follow you, find some of the resources that you guys are creating? ChristianityToday.com, and they can sign up as a member there and get everything. All right. Dr. Moore, thank you so much for spending time with us today on Man to Men.
Thank you, Jared. Thanks for having me.
Man to Men is powered by Beta Upsilon Chi, the nation's largest Christian fraternity, commonly referred to as Bucks. We exist to equip and empower college men to live faithfully and lead courageously. You can find out more about Beta Upsilon Chi by transliterating our Greek letters and adding a .org. That's byx.org. If you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe and consider giving to our work with college men across the country by following the individual partner link in the show notes. We are produced, rather well I might add, by the good gentlemen of the Good Podcast Company. Producer Bradley's at the helm over there. Until then, I'm Dr. Jared Musgrove with Man to Men.